Welcome, David Kroodsma, Fernando Paolo, Jennifer Raynor as our panelists today. I will let you introduce yourselves. Please tell us who you are and what's going to be the content here today.
Do you want to see each introduce ourselves now, Andrea, or should we go through and introduce ourselves during the presentation?
No, please go ahead. Like if you want to introduce yourselves before the presentation, that's okay. I would start. Yeah.
I'm David Kroodsma. I'm the Director of Research and Innovation. Been working with Global Fishing Watch since 2015, and just really excited about this project. I am based in California, and let's go to Fernando and then Jen.
Hi, I'm Fernando Paolo. I am a senior machine learning engineer at Global Fishing Watch. I've been working with Global Fishing Watch for about 4 years now. I am based in Pasadena, Southern California.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Jen Raynor. I'm an assistant professor of economics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Of course, I'm located in Wisconsin, Madison. Before I was working here, I worked for the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Fisheries on fishery management in the United States. And now I've been working really closely with Global Fishing Watch on these broader scale global fisheries research projects.
Thank you. I will let you begin if you can share your screen.
Great. I'll share in a second. I'm going to start and give an introduction. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of what Global Fishing Watch is about and how our technology got to the point of this study. Then Fernando's going to talk about how we processed all of the satellite imagery, what our methods was, how it actually works. Jen will follow up with the findings. What does this mean? What did our study show? And then I will follow up with a final about kind of what's next, how we want you to be able to use this data, what kind of feedback, what kind of areas of research we are continuing on. One of our goals here is to have you be able to use the data we're using here, and also to be getting feedback on it, and also to be generating ideas for new areas of inquiry, because collaboration with the broader research, marine science, data science community is really critical to the success of Global Fishing Watch's mission. So what is Global Fishing Watch? We're a pretty unique organization, which is one reason I really love working here for this organization. We were founded in 2015 as a project between, as a collaboration. There was a project between Google and the nonprofits SkyTruth and Oceana, with an original focus on using AI and big data to map and track the industrial fishing fleet in order to create transparency in this historically opaque industry. We were very successful at this, and in 2017, we became our own independent international nonprofit. When I joined, we were about 8 people, and we now have a staff of 85 in over 24 countries on 6 continents. We're a truly global organization, and that's something I'm very proud of. We have several areas of work. So we process data and undertake research, which is what I focus on and we'll be talking about. But we also produce online products to help people use this data to manage their ocean. And we have a growing policy team that's working all over the world with governments to encourage them to share their data and help them apply this technology to better manage their waters. So why are we trying to map activity at sea? This is not just a research endeavor. We're doing it because we are trying to improve the management of the oceans. There's about 1 billion people depend on fish as their primary source of protein. About 80% of global trade is shipped over the water. 30% of the world's oil is produced offshore. At the same time, the ocean economy is a few $1 trillion. We have a third of fish stocks, which are fished beyond sustainable levels. And about 30 to 50% of marine habitat critical marine habitat has been lost to human industrialization. So the ocean is very important. It's being degraded, yet at the same time, public information about human activity is really lacking. And at Global Fishing Watch, we are trying to fix that. I work on the research team, and our arm of Global Fishing Watch, which is a team of machine learning engineers and data scientists, works with academics. So it's not just us crunching data, but we work with academics all over the world to co-create our key algorithms and apply them to critical scientific questions. We have published over 50 papers, and we have a number of key partners, which we have signed agreements with, but we're also always looking for new partners and also people who can apply our data sets. So we'd love to hear from you if you have ideas on research projects to do with us. Collaboration is very important to our work, which is why we have authors from several different institutions on this paper. So how did we get to this paper? Like, why did we actually process all this satellite imagery? And we have to go back to our original technology of Global Fishing Watch, which is tracking vessels using the Automatic Identification System, or AIS. And the way it works is that boats broadcast their GPS positions over radio so that other boats nearby can see where they are and avoid collisions. So these are GPS positions specifically designed for other boats in the water to see where they are. However, these messages are unencrypted, and they can be collected by satellites or receivers all along the world's coastlines. And what that does is there's some companies we have purchased global data sets of to give us the movements of these vessels across the world. There's a few 100,000 of these boats. They're usually larger boats that broadcast their GPS positions. And we can use that to create a map of all large vessels in the ocean that broadcast their GPS positions. And it looks like this. I love this map. In fact, I even have one on my wall back there. You look, and it's really rich. You're looking at over 50 billion GPS positions here across 5 years of fishing and non-fishing boats. And what we did originally at Global Fishing Watch is develop machine learning algorithms to determine, based on how the boats move, are they fishing boats or non-fishing boats, and when are they fishing? So you can filter this to just fishing boats, right? So here is all the boats, here is just the fishing boats. And then you can do all types of research off of this. In 2018, we published a paper in Science to produce the first ever detailed high-resolution global map of fishing activity, drawing on the few tens of thousands of fishing boats that were broadcasting their locations over GPS data. And this has launched a whole series of research projects. It has also gone, if you go to globalfishingwatch.org, you can interact directly with this data set, as well as the data set for non-fishing boats. And here's an animation from our website showing where fishing activity is happening over several months. It is, and this data has been used in all types of research and management. It has been useful in helping create 8 marine protected areas with a combined area larger than Egypt. It has been used to make a number of different patrols more effective because the Coast Guards know where fishing is most likely happening. We've done studies to identify the potential extent of forced labor in the ocean. It's been used to show where sharks are at risk from overfishing, quantify the extent of bottom trawling in different places, the non-fishing data, all the tankers. That data is right now being used to address where whales are at risk from being collisions with vessels, and it's truly exciting. It's been really exciting to see the many applications of this, and I encourage you to look at these data sets and we'd love to hear from you about other new ways to apply it. But there's been one problem with this data set, which is that it's only boats that are publicly broadcasting their GPS positions. And as you might imagine, a lot of boats don't do that. And also we have found, a lot of boats that are engaging in illegal activity do so are not publicly sharing where they are. We had a study come out a few years ago that showed massive amounts of illegal fishing in North Korea. The majority of those boats were not broadcasting their GPS positions. So in the last few years, we have been working to draw on new sources of data, specifically satellite imagery, to literally take pictures of the ocean and count the true extent of human activity in the ocean. And this will lead to a project I'll talk about at the end of this study called the Open Ocean Project, which is Global Fishing Watch's initiative to map all major human activity at sea, not just fishing, all of the large activity that's happening. But this paper here is really the cornerstone of that project. And Fernando and Jen are going to tell you more about it before I wrap up. about the kind of applications and where we'll be going next. So, Fernando, I will hand that off to you. I'm going to stop sharing and just tell us about what we did here, how we tried to fill in the map and address this challenge of what we were not seeing in the GPS data.
Okay, I'll take it from here. Can you all see my slides? So I'm gonna present a high-level overview of the method behind the paper, and the idea with that is that you get a better sense of what this data is about, and also, very important, of the limitations of the data and the further improvements that we will be implementing in the coming months. And then after this, there is another part of the presentation when you're gonna see a high-level overview of the results we got from this paper. So the title of our published paper is Satellite Mapping Reveals Extensive Industrial Activity at Sea. Right, so before anything else, let's start by some key concepts. And this has been quite challenging, actually, to convey, in particular to the media, right? So dark vessels, what do we mean with dark vessels? We simply mean vessels not publicly tracked by AIS data, right? And not publicly tracked does not imply illegal. So there are various reasons why we cannot track many of the vessels we detect with AIS data. Another important point is that we do not infer illegal fishing activity, right, in this work at all. And this goes tied to the previous concept, right? While we know that many vessels in the ocean might shut off their AIS device because they're engaging in illicit activity, we cannot actually say if the vessel that we detected is doing that or not. And for the most part, actually, most vessels are not engaging in illegal activities. They are not trackable publicly for various other reasons. And finally, a very important concept that the results, right, that we present are estimates from models, right? And as we all know, models are not perfect. So we are constantly improving these models after the publication of this work. So here we have the first slide showing a global coverage of the satellite that we use. We use the Sentinel-1, which is a SAR mission by the European Space Agency. These are two satellites that they fly in tandem, apart 180 degrees from each other. And this is showing you in color, the areas of the ocean that this satellite mission images. This is very important because we receive a lot of questions of, why don't we have data here and there? Why there are gaps here and there? So the main objective of this satellite mission was not to map the ocean, right? This is why it covers mostly the coastal areas. However, the areas that this satellite mission covers is where most industrial activity is concentrated. If we look at AIS activity, which covers, globally, we have an idea that within this area covered by Sentinel-1, we should find about 75% or more on all industrial activity in the ocean. So the majority of it, we are able to cover with Sentinel-1. Another thing that you will notice here that is an important concept, and I will be explaining a little bit more later on, is the color scale, which represent the number of acquisitions in different locations, right? Dark means a lot of images. Light yellow means just a few images. And you can see, areas around Europe, it's pretty dark. While, other areas like in Southeast Asia, it's not, it's lighter color. So, and this is expected because Sentinel-1 is a European mission, right? It's paid by, a European public funding. Therefore, the main target are European waters. So this has some implication on how we treat the data. So to give you a better idea on how the satellites operate, on how we image the ocean, let's take a look here on an area, close in the North Sea. Let's suppose I'm interested in measuring what's happening within this polygon in red. So these are 3 days of imagery. And if you can see, right, after 3 days, each of these bands is one satellite path over, my area of interest. And these boundaries in white represents individual images. So each of these rectangles here is one image that we process. So after 3 days, the satellite has passed, one time over my area of interest and then a tiny bit on another side. So this is to show that the coverage of the satellite is not homogeneous, right? So we have to wait and accumulate several days of imagery. Now here we have on the same area, 7 months of imagery. So after 7 months, I am able to completely cover my area of interest several times. And then we start seeing a pattern of stuff in the ocean that emerges, right? Let's zoom in there. So here we have then a mosaic of SAR images. Each of these dots is an object at sea, where, if you see the geometric ones, those are wind farms. The scattered dots, those are vessels, and you can start seeing patterns, recognize patterns like shipping lanes. So this is how we start now detecting objects at sea. So every time the satellite flew over this area, it detected whatever it was there at that time. Now, very well. So what's the challenge with this scenario? As I pointed out here in red, is that some areas have more images than others. So that means that the number of detections that we're getting is in part a function of the number of images that we're able to acquire, right? So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. Before we go there, so here is the type of data that we are providing. This is the key data set. It's not the only one, but this is the key data set that comes out of this approach. These are point data. This is point data. These are individual detections of vessels and offshore infrastructure. So in here, I have the same example that I showed to you for the North Sea. This is after 5 years, which is the period of our study, right? So you're going to have a bunch of individual detections. Basically, this gives you the position, the time, and a few other pieces of information about each of these detections. However, as I mentioned to you, right, the number of detections, and this goes for the entire area, not just the North Sea, is a function, among other things, of the number of images we have. So we need to transform this point data to total quantitative analysis into a raster data, where we take now at every pixel or every cell or every location in the ocean, the average number of detections by normalizing that number, the total number of detections there by the number of images I have. So by doing that, basically we can now ignore the difference in satellite coverage in number of images, and we can start track activity, not individual detections, but now either vessel activity or offshore infrastructure activity, like the evolution of development of wind farms and that kind of stuff. So let's jump now in the different steps of this methodology. The first step is the detection approach, right? So this is a little bit of a technical and complicated slide, but I just wanted to get one main idea from here. So this represents the performance of our detection model, right? Basically, this says what's the capability of detecting a vessel that we have with this current model, right? This is called a recall curve. It doesn't matter much the details of it, and you have two in here, also doesn't matter much. These are two different detection recall curves given different scenarios. Either we consider all the vessels together, or we only look at vessels that are well spaced within each other. So the capability of detection changes a little bit. But the main message here is that our ability to detect vessels in the ocean is a function, among other things, of the size of the vessels. So, and I put as an example here 3 different sizes on how you would read this recall curve, right? And it is quite intuitive, right? If very tiny objects are difficult to see on SAR imagery or any optical or any other imagery, because in part of the resolution of the imagery. So we have a limitation of how much we can see small objects. So with our model at the moment, if we take, for example, 15-meter boats, this first line, we can detect 15-meter boats about 50% of the time. How about 50-meter boats? Well, the models start doing a lot better. We can detect these kind of boats about 90% of the time. What about the big boats, 100-meter? we detect these boats over 95% of the time, right? So this is something to keep in mind when you treat the data. The next stage, this is the detection. The next stage is how do we infer if a detected vessel is likely a fishing vessel or a non-fishing vessel, like an oil tanker, right? Or a support vessel or a shipping kind of vessel. So we have another model. This is a neural network-based model, and we use the context in which that vessel is operating. So here you're seeing 11 different fields of information. The vessel in question that we are detecting is right at the center. This is of each of these thumbnails, and each of these thumbnails represent, the first one is the average size of the vessels around the area, the density of vessels around the area, the bathymetry of the area, the distance to port with respect to the vessel we are detecting, the presence of small vessels in the area, the presence of large vessels in the area, the temperature of the water, the state of the ocean currents in there, the variation of the temperature, the variation in currents, and the concentration of chlorophyll, together with the length of the vessel that we also estimated previously, right? With all this information, our model estimates if that detection is likely to be a fishing vessel or a non-fishing vessel. We also do a similar classification for fixed objects and to identify what kind of offshore infrastructure they are likely to be. This is a different model. It operates slightly different. In this case, we use both SAR imagery, this is the thumbnails you see on top, as well as optical imagery. These are the thumbnails you see at the bottom. So what the model sees here are 4 views of that given fixed infrastructure detection. 2 bands from the SAR images, and this, there are different polarizations of SAR. This gets a little bit complicated, but it's how SAR operates. We have 2 ways of looking at that information. Again, we are classifying the object at the middle, right? Then we go with optical imagery. This is the most traditional imagery that we all are used to. We have the RGB on the left and the infrared on the right. So the model for every object has a view, these 4 views, and it can infer if it is looking at a wind turbine or an oil platform, like in the middle, or something else, like in this case is aquaculture, right? So this is how we classify offshore infrastructure. Then we have the final step where we match all our detections to available AIS broadcast messages, right? Global Fishing Watch has a massive database of processed AIS messages that we are constantly updating. So this is also a quite complex algorithm. It's a probabilistic algorithm that tries to define, find pairs between given a detection location and time, what is the likelihood that it matches to an AIS broadcast given billions of AIS broadcasts available. So with that, then we can start inferring all the vessels that we detected that were likely broadcasting AIS. And this is what you see here in yellow. And this is an example for the Mediterranean Sea. And you can see that, around Europe, there is a very good usage of AIS, right? There's a lot of activity. It's all yellow. So then what happened if we plot the detections that did not match to AIS? Now we start seeing the patterns of activity that is likely not broadcasting AIS. And this is depicted here in pink color, right? And the contrast here is pretty dramatic, right? If we didn't have this approach of detecting activity at sea using satellite imagery, so the picture from AIS is this one, which shows in this particular example that Northern Africa, for example, has almost no fishing activity happening. With detections based on imagery, then we start changing that global view of human activity at sea. Very well. Finally, this is just a summary. I'm not going to enter too much in details here, but these are the 2 main data sets then that come out of this work and that you will have full access to it, right? One is the industrial vessels, the detections of individual vessels, and both data sets are point data. And you have, very simple columns like, the ID of the scene. If you want to trace back, where is the image from Sentinel-1 that this vessel was extracted from? With this ID, you can simply use an interface like Google Earth Engine or SciHub from ESA and actually get the scene and look at it yourself. The time, the location of the vessel, you will have an estimate of the length of the vessel. This is very useful for analysis. Then if it match to a known vessel broadcasting AIS, you will have the identity of that vessel, the strength of the matching. You will have also the strength of the classification if it is a fishing or non-fishing vessel, because that varies. The model sometimes is very sure that is a fishing vessel, like 90%. Sometimes it's not so sure, like 65%. So this is information that's very useful for you to decide how you want to handle the data. And then very important here, as I showed to you, that the number of overpasses changes, from location to location. So we give you that information. At the location of the detection, we give you how many images the satellite acquired over this 5-year period. And the other big data set is the offshore infrastructure, which is even simpler. You will have an ID, you will have the time from the composite, and this is very important to clarify. Offshore infrastructure is not detected on individual images, but on a composite of a 6-month worth of imagery. We collapse 6 months worth of imagery, grab the detection of offshore infrastructure, and then the middle point on the window is the composite date, location, and label of the kind of image. On our data portal, we will give you access to this link, so you can actually copy and paste it if you want. We will keep updating this data set, right? The study that we performed in Nature covered 2017 to 2021. Now we have analyzed more recent years, and you will have access to more recent data as well. And I will leave it to Jen right now.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, great. So I'm going to jump in and give you guys just a high-level overview of the main findings that we had in this paper. I'm going to try to keep this brief so that we can have plenty of time for your questions. But the really big picture here is that we find a remarkable amount of activity is occurring outside of this public AIS monitoring systems. So first, focusing on fishing vessels, we find that about 75% of fishing vessels are not publicly tracked. Much of this activity is happening around Africa and South Asia, which you can see indicated the fraction of vessels that are not publicly tracked, if it's high, is red in this graph. If they are more likely to be publicly tracked, it's blue in this graph. And you can see a lot of the vessels that are not broadcasting AIS are located again around Africa and South Asia, but there's a lot of vessels that are not broadcasting all over the world. The only real exception, which was already alluded to earlier, is that the majority of vessels are publicly tracked with AIS around Europe, indicated by these blue areas. Now, knowing where all these vessels are that we didn't previously see with AIS only really changes what we know about the scale, scope, and location of fishing activity around the world. So I'm going to give just 2 examples here. One is that public AIS data wrongly suggests that Asia and Europe have similar amounts of fishing activity in their borders. But once we use our new methods here, we find that that's simply not true, and that Asia really dominates in terms of fishing vessels. So for every 10 vessels we find on the water, 7 were in Asia and 1 was in Europe, and 2 were in other parts of the world. I'm showing a map here of Southeast Asia to just give you an idea of the scale of how many vessels we detected that were not publicly tracked, again, indicated by red on this figure. Okay, another example, which Fernando kind of already alluded to in his part, is fishing in the Mediterranean. So again, public AIS wrongly suggests relative magnitudes that aren't quite right. So it looks from AIS data like there's about 10 times more fishing on the European side of the Mediterranean compared to the African side. Using our data set, we can see that the number of vessels is actually about equal in the northern versus southern Mediterranean. Now, we can also use our data to really reveal detailed patterns of fishing activity that might not have been visible otherwise with public AIS data. The top left of this graph is showing the Mediterranean that I just showed on the previous slide. So on the top right, we're moving more east in the Mediterranean, and we can see that there's a lot of fishing happening around ocean banks, these kind of shallower areas, and again, a large number of vessels that are not publicly tracked, indicated in red. And I'll just point to this bottom right-hand corner, which is in South Asia, where 100% of the vessels that we detected were not publicly broadcasting AIS. So we can learn a lot from this data set in this region, and we can see all of these vessels are clustering essentially on the continental shelf. We can also zoom into really local areas, for example, around marine protected areas. Here's two examples in the Galapagos Marine Reserve on the left and the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park on the right. Again, each point is a vessel that we detected, and red vessels are not publicly tracked and blue vessels are. And we can see that there are a lot of vessels within these marine protected areas and a lot of vessels that are not publicly tracked. So again, we can't infer illegal activity happening necessarily in this case, but our data can help enforcement agencies identify where vessels are in these parks and target patrol efforts. I'm also currently working on a project where we're expanding this analysis for marine protected areas globally to try to get a more detailed view on what might be happening with vessels in these areas. Moving on to non-fishing vessels, which are mostly transport and energy-related vessels. In contrast to fishing vessels, these most typically are publicly tracked. So about 75% are publicly tracked, and about 25% are not. Most of the vessels that are not publicly tracked are in South and Southeast Asia, indicated in red on this figure. And this area has poor AIS reception in general, so it might be that they really were broadcasting their AIS locations. They just weren't being picked up correctly. We can also, instead of just looking cross-sectionally in space, we can look at trends over time using this data. And one example that we looked at in the paper was what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. On the top graph, we show trends in the number of vessels detected who were industrial or classified as industrial fishing vessels, and on the bottom, transport and energy vessels. And what we can see is that fishing activity dropped by about 12% during the pandemic, whereas transport and energy activities continued to grow. And moving on to fixed infrastructure, we detected about 28,000 offshore fixed structures. These were mostly oil and wind structures. Oil is in yellow on this map, wind is in blue. There was a small number of other structures in pink. Oil, as you can see, is in the places you'd readily expect, Venezuela, Middle East, whereas wind really took off mostly in the northern European areas and in China, especially China. So we did see a lot of growth in offshore infrastructure over this period, largely led by wind development. So this figure is showing the number of structures that were likely oil structures in these purple bars versus the number of wind turbines with this sort of orange line. And you can see two things. One is that wind structures grew really rapidly during this period of our study, and that interestingly, wind turbines now outnumber oil platforms in the ocean by the end of this period. Finally, we can try to understand conflicting uses in the ocean using this data. It gives us a richer picture of what's happening, especially in these very busy areas. This map shows the North Sea, where there is a lot of fishing, a lot of shipping, and what this map is showing is a lot of fixed infrastructure. So what we're showing here is on the left-hand side, oil vessel traffic. These are vessels that at some point interacted with the oil structures that we detected. And on the right are vessels that at some point interacted with the wind structures we detected. And so what you can see is that these areas are very busy, and that the real footprint of offshore fixed infrastructure is bigger than the structures themselves. There's also all this vessel traffic coming and going from these areas to help service and support these regions. And this data can help us think about how to manage these conflicting uses, energy development versus fishing, for example. So I'm going to be turning it over to David now to kind of wrap up and think about what's next with this project.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. I want to leave some time for questions. So I'm just going to show 3 slides here and say that, the goal of this project, this is we're really excited to publish this research and have these findings. The long-term goal is to have this technology be useful for marine management. And so we'd love to hear from this group about how this can be used. We're already pursuing a number of projects that apply this, much in the same way we did with the AIS data, things such as estimating carbon dioxide emissions from vessels based on the total vessel traffic. We have another project from our partners at SkyTruth, which are using the oil platforms and vessels to help, and combining that with some other data sources to help link oil spills to vessels and structures to help improve accountability. There's the simple effort of truly mapping fishing in these areas that Jen showed, and also better management of marine protected areas and marine spatial planning to identify where we should put marine protected areas. So there's a ton of different applications of this, and we are working now with the broader community to do so. And we would love to hear from you about ways that you would like to use this and things you think we can do. An important thing we're doing right now as well is drawing on other sources of imagery, such as, so this is Sentinel-2. We've been talking Sentinel-1, which is using satellite radar. Sentinel-2 is an optical sensor, so it takes pictures like this that are much easier to interpret. And we have a machine learning model that is detecting vessels here. Now you have the problem of clouds, as you can see, but when it's not cloudy, you do a much better job of seeing the small boats. And so we think we see on sunny days, we see over half the 10-meter boats in the world, and some of the boats that are like 7 to 10 meters, which is very exciting for getting at that smaller vessel activity that I know some of you are talking about in this thing. And we have we're working on a kind of global analysis of this, as well as kind of understanding how this can be used in management, very similar ways. There's other sensors you can layer it in. So as Fernando talked about, Sentinel-1 is only once every few days, but as soon as you bring in Sentinel-2 and a few other sources that are in the works, you can get a much more complete picture of human activity in the ocean. As Jen showed, fishing is still the activity which is the least well mapped, but all of the other activity in the ocean is increasing rapidly, offshore wind and shipping. And so in order for us to manage this growing ocean economy, we need accurate maps. And so that is what Global Fishing Watch is, the next phase of our research and development, which is something we are calling the Open Ocean Project, which is an initiative we are funded for to engage to research over the next few years to bring in all of these different satellite sources, combine them with the GPS data to produce a comprehensive picture of human activity at sea. So all the shipping, all the offshore infrastructure, we're looking at aquaculture as well, because there's large installations and they are competing for space in the ocean. And so this is a simulation we've given. This is real data, but the platform is a simulation that we're building. This shows off, you have GPS tracked fishing. This is AIS fishing, the dark fishing, which is the non-publicly tracked. You can see those areas of the world where we don't have that. You have white dots here showing oil platforms. And then finally, the shipping activity as well. And we bring that all together into platform and make that freely available to help out with management in the ocean. Thank you. We would love to take some questions now, help, and feel free to follow up with us directly. Feel free to please give us feedback on the data set we've made available. Please let us know what other data you'd like to see to help with your work. This is our, publishing this paper is really just the start of this work. The real work is to get this data and analyses to people who can use it. So thank you.